Funding for New Mexico in Focus provided by viewers like you.
This week on New Mexico in Focus, insight on a new environmental crimes task force aiming to protect not only the health of our environment, but also our people.
It's an important aspect of leveling the playing field. Like, the most vulnerable should not be the most polluted.
And the decision ahead for the governor as she gets ready to choose our new public regulation commissioners. New Mexico in Focus starts now. Thanks for joining us this week. I'm your host, Gene Grant. A new poll is showing public support for changes to the way our legislature functions. In the second half of the show, I sit down with Mario Jimenez from Common Cause New Mexico to ask how extending the length of sessions and paying lawmakers could modernize how our elected officials govern. City councilors in Albuquerque are considering a change to the city's Zero Fare program that would require photo ID as the only way to ride for free. At the bottom of the hour, I'll ask our line opinion panelists if that contradicts the goal of the program. And in about 20 minutes, the panel and I will debate the state's decision to require thousands of government employees to return to the office in January. But we start with the nominations for the Public Regulation Commission as the governor weighs her options. Let's get to the line. Welcome to our line opinion panelists for the week. Joining us at the virtual roundtable, we have Tom Garrity of the Garrity Group Public Relations. We're welcoming Algernon Damasa, editor at the Deming Headlight, and always glad to have Inez Russell Gomez. She is editorial page editor at the Santa Fe New Mexican. Thank you all for joining us. Now, the PRC nominating committee has sent 9 names to the governor for her consideration for the new 3-person Public Regulation Commission. Of the 9 nominated, 7 live in New Mexico, 5 are Democrats, 3 are declined to state, and 1 nominee is a Republican. All 9 have energy work experience. Now, we won't get into the names of all 9 nominees and kind of parse that out, but broadly first, Tom, let me start this. Is this process, the process other than the names, shaping up the way it was intended when we think back to how the vote went down, what folks were expecting?
Yeah, wow. Well, there's I think what was intended and what actually occurred. And not necessarily what was intended, but I think the process that Representative Egoff was able to facilitate, I think has brought about it brought about 15 very strong candidates, now 9 very strong candidates. So from that perspective, I think that process worked to really develop some people who really have their wherewithal with respect to energy issues, environment, FERC. And all the different aspects of the industry. And I think who have some good knowledge of different aspects of New Mexico, not the entire state of New Mexico. I think that has been brought up by many. But, I think that the initial process has been successful.
Tom, let me ask you this, just real quick. How do we know, or in your opinion, that they are strong candidates? Meaning, was there a list of attributes we were looking for all of these nominees that the checklist has basically been checked off?
No, and that's just it. There weren't any necessarily job qualifications. There were intentions as far as, there was and there was an actual document, I believe, that actually listed, the types of things that needed to be included. But for the most part, there's, and sometimes in different processes, you have what's listed and then there's what's wanted.
Sure. And
I think that this process checked the box of what was listed and then brought about the candidates that were wanted.
Inez, I got an interesting question here. One notable name left off the final list of 9 nominees was current PRC Commissioner Cynthia Hall. Sorry about that, Cynthia. Interview with Source New Mexico, Ms. Hall said her experience would have been valuable. Your columnist at your newspaper, Simon Milan Simonich, had a great column this week about this very issue. Was the idea to just have a clean start no matter who was on the PRC beforehand, or are we missing something when it comes to institutional knowledge and an independent thinker, as Ms. Hall proved herself to be?
That's a very good point. I do think they wanted a clean start because one of the reasons the constitutional amendment was presented to begin with, which was to move from elected to appointed, is the idea that by joining the vast majority of states, which also appoint the regulatory commissions, we would leave something that's been kind of messy and controversial behind. And even though I think the current PRC has done a good job in terms of being scandal-free, working hard, a really diligent body, if you go back to the days of the Corporation Commission, if you go through the PRC, every 3 years there's a new explosion of embarrassment.
Right.
And I think they did want to maybe start over. And who knows in the interviews what they found in someone's qualifications that made them think, well, this person's going to be better. Now, obviously, Cynthia Hall is eminently qualified to be on the PRC, and why they didn't include her along the way, we could only know if we could get inside the brains of the people doing the interviews.
Your columnists sort of surmised it might have been because of her votes, tough votes on PNM and other things that might have become political without her even,
I mean, apart from political, one of the things, we had an interesting My View today in the paper by someone named Glenn Lyons, who was also an applicant and didn't make it all the way to the finalist. And he said, this is a great group of people. I think you guys have done a good job. So even though I'm not one of them, I think this is going to be great. And he has said, and what I've heard from PNM and other people who are regulated, and also from, consumers, is that you need a PRC that is predictable. Whichever way it goes, it's almost not as important whether they're one way or the other way. You have to know that if they promise Facebook they're going to do X, that they don't change their mind and then say, no, we're going to do Y now. So I think that's part of it. Is it's not just, it sounds great, we took a tough vote. Well, you took a tough vote and then you changed your mind a year later and no one knows what you're doing. And I think they need a predictable PRC that you don't always know what they're going to do, but they make sense.
Algernon, another interesting wrinkle here is native representation has been a concern from the start of this process, no doubt. Ron Lovato, former two-term governor of OK-Owingeh, a member of the nominating committee, and one of the 9 nominees is Joseph Little. He's an attorney from Mescalero Apache tribe. He's got experience in water rights and tribal governments, of course. Is Mr. Little's perspective necessary on the PRC, or it doesn't have to be him or her, just some kind of native perspective on the PRC? Is that a necessary thing we have to have at this point?
Without question, Mr. Little has perspective that is of value, but I think another thing here is we have to talk about trust in the body, public trust in the body.
Right.
And, with the constitutional change, we're not taking the politics out of the process. We're just shifting the way the politics work when we have an appointed body rather than an elected body. When you have PRC members running campaigns, certain issues dominate and certain issues get neglected. The PRC has a broad portfolio. They don't just regulate utility companies. They have a broad portfolio of services and things that they regulate. And so by making it an appointed body, you're shifting the way the politics work. But we get not only into the necessity of Native American representation, but we also have to, I think people who look like me sometimes assume that there is a Native American perspective. But we have, 23 nations and pueblos in this state, and they don't all have the same views and same opinions. And so now we start to have a conversation about which tribe, which pueblo, which nation needs to be representative on the body. And so you're just changing the way the politics work. You're not taking politics out of the process.
That's a fair point right there. Especially to buttress Algernon's point there, we only have 3. You can't really spread the sort of geography and everything, all the backgrounds amongst just 3 instead of 5. Tom, there's a controversy, got to get into this, over outgoing House Speaker Brian Egolf's involvement in the nominating committee. Late last week, the State Ethics Commission found Egolf was in violation of the state law and the state constitution when he nominated himself for the committee. Does that finding call into the legitimacy of the process into question here?
I don't think it. I mean, if the process was flawed, then I think that we'd have reason to jump in and criticize the process. But Representative Egoff, and the reason I'm saying representative as opposed to Speaker of the House is because he's in this role as representative. He was the one who really ran the process, and it was by people who watched. People said that he did a very good job. So from that perspective, I think there was no problem with, what he did in his role. Where it comes into issue is the Governmental Conduct Act and just the ethics in that, which is why Representative Miguel Garcia was really upset over Representative Egoff appointing himself to that particular board, and I think he was equally as upset with the Ethics Commission for just reaching an agreement with the Representative Egoff as opposed to doing a full investigation. And I think that the ethics team did the right thing as far as hey, let's work this out. I don't think there's a need for a huge investigation. People who watch this process on a regular basis kind of scratched their heads when we all saw the appointment, but we all kind of knew at that point that he had already acknowledged that he wasn't going to be running again. So it was just a unfortunate subtitle to this whole kind of narrative, so to speak.
Inez, let me ask you this about Mr. Egoff, though, but he resigned from the nominating panel pretty soon after voting on the finalists. I just, something about that just doesn't sit. And don't forget, that same day, the lawyer of the State Ethics Commission finally made that preliminary decision on the situation Tom just mentioned from Mr. Garcia, and we have that from the commission. We'll put that up on our website a little bit later today. But Inez, I have to ask again, did Mr. Egoff take the right approach here, and were we served by this approach?
I think that in most cases, it's probably best not to appoint yourself. But I also understand that someone who knows as much as he knows about everything might think, well, I'm just the best guy to do it, so I'm leaving, so why not? And, he resigned after the finalists were chosen because the finalists are chosen. His work is done. In a perfect world, there would have been somebody else that he would have picked, and we wouldn't be having this discussion.
But does it make it seem, Algernon, just a couple seconds here, that this thing is political? When you have a political person nominating himself and then resigning on his own as well, you know what I mean? It just doesn't feel right if you're looking for a political problem here.
Exactly right, and that's why the government, that's why we have the Conduct Act, right? And helpfully, now we have this independent body, the State Ethics Commission, that can step in and say, this is about what the law says. It's not about the politics. But the timing of it was such that Representative Egoff was able to just say, "Oh, okay, our work is done anyway," and leave without going through the process.
It's very Santa Fe, as they say. Thanks to our line opinion panel on that one. We'll meet back here in a little over 10 minutes to talk through the state's plan to bring thousands of government employees back to the office to start 2023.
By extending our sessions, not only do we provide more time for the public to be involved in the legislative session, but also another important component is giving our legislators and their administrative staff time to properly research the legislation that is before them.
The state of New Mexico and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency have launched a new task force to investigate and prosecute environmental crimes in the state. Now, they can range from things like dumping oil or hazardous waste to falsifying records. Now, these acts pollute the state's air and water and put people's health at risk. They're punishable by fines and even jail time, but too often they go undetected or unprosecuted. The new task force has its work cut out for it. Our Land's Laura Paskus talks this week with New Mexico Environment Department Secretary James Kenney and the EPA's special agent in charge of the Criminal Investigation Unit, Kim Boehne.
Secretary Kenney, Kim Boehne, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having us.
So the Environmental Crimes Task Force, this is something new for New Mexico. Why do we need this?
Great to be here, Laura, and good question. The Environmental Crimes Task Force fills a big void in the state of New Mexico. Historically, most states' environmental agencies work with federal partners to prosecute civil and criminal violations, those that maybe for the viewers are unintentional and those that are intentional. With the lack of having a task force here for so many years, we have no barometer as to whether there are criminal activities occurring that would be hurting the environment, hurting public health, operating outside of the regulatory scheme. The task force will fill that void and share intelligence and then move towards prosecuting those individuals or corporations that are criminally violating environmental laws.
So can you describe for me, like, what's the difference between when we're talking about the environment, like a civil versus a criminal violation? Is this just like a crime versus an accident? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so I wouldn't think of it as a crime versus an accident, because sometimes when an employer doesn't put the necessary resources behind compliance, you can have an accident. And that could be an intentional means to either make money or avoid the regulatory scheme. So I would think of it a little bit more, and this is just a general rule of thumb, that when a company or person inadvertently violates the law, they may have, the best intention, but they don't execute it properly. That is often a civil violation. Maybe they forgot to submit a piece of paper that is important to the Environment Department assuring compliance, or they forgot to do some other activity. A criminal violation, usually there's intent. There's intent to circumvent, defraud, avoid, and not play by the rules. And therefore, a criminal violation, in my opinion, is more egregious, and which is why there's typically not only penalties but sometimes jail time involved.
Okay. Kim, can you give us some examples of either cases you've worked on or incidents you've seen in the region that maybe could happen in New Mexico as well?
Certainly. I think the one thing that most environmental crimes have in common is that there is a deliberate decision, usually to save money or to make money, and it's at the expense of the environment or human health. So release of chemicals or other hazardous pollutants into the air, perhaps an industry is falsifying their air emission, or it can be anything from illegal importation of refrigerants and pesticides. We're seeing quite a bit of that. You would know by usually the label would be in a different language. There's supposed to be an EPA verbiage on pesticide products. Situations where there's fires or explosions because of mismanagement of chemicals, dumping into waters, either state or federal waters or sewer systems that would ultimately cause harm to our wastewater treatment plants, and then falsification at wastewater treatment plants, drinking water plants. So those are just a number of things that come to mind.
Yeah, so environmental enforcement is already a challenge in New Mexico. I'm thinking, for example, of how many oil and gas wells there are versus how many inspectors there are. How is this task force going to meet the challenges that could potentially be really big?
Yeah, again, a good question, because there is a bit of a David versus Goliath kind of feel from a regulatory standpoint versus some bad actors. Like, how do you find those? And part of the reason an environmental crimes task force works so well is because you leverage state and federal law enforcement agencies as well as tribal agencies to come together both on the investigation, building the case, then working with prosecutors to enforce against that entity. So the sharing of information actually is synergistic and allows you to expand your resource base. So if you think about it, where New Mexico Environment Department may have a hazardous waste inspector out in the field looking at a facility who's managing hazardous waste, if they see something that maybe isn't within their jurisdiction or just doesn't appear proper, they will bring that information back and elevate it back through the task force So there's more eyes and ears out there and more sharing of information, and that does help level the playing field between the regulated community and the regulators.
So we're talking about protecting the environment. This task force also has an interest in environmental justice. Is that right? What's the environmental justice component here?
Yeah, absolutely. So I can speak to this not only as a cabinet secretary, but also from my experience when I was with the Environmental Protection Agency. Oftentimes when you're going into communities to investigate environmental crimes, you're going into those that are socioeconomically challenged because you'll see, there's a term fence line communities, and those residents that are closest to the industrial activity are often the ones the most impacted. So there's very much an inequity when these crimes occur in those communities because they're already socially economically depressed. And that's where the task force will spend some time looking at that. It's an important aspect of leveling the playing field. Like, the most vulnerable should not be the most polluted.
So I realize that you are not lawyers, but I've always wondered, why a company, which is profit-driven, can come in and contaminate groundwater that might have impacts on people for generations, or can, say, contaminate groundwater to the point where entire businesses or industries are decimated. Why is it that environmental crimes and things like that aren't often taken as seriously in our society as even something like property theft against an individual?
It's a good question. That's why I'm in my job, to ensure that there is a level playing field and we prevent those, right? I don't think it's success when we're putting more money into cleanup. I think it's kind of admitting failure. And we should be working to prevent those types of situations from happening. The Environment Department, through most of its programs, has the ability to deny permits to bad actors. We're looking into that more, and we're utilizing those provisions in ways we haven't in the past. That is, a philosophy of New Mexico should be racing to the top, not attracting the lowest common denominator. But I think that's why you need enforcement programs. That's why you have to be out there and ensuring that compliance is occurring day to day, week to week, month to month. And when you're not out there checking, that's when some of those problems that can happen or that occur can really leave long-lasting impacts on our environment, as you're pointing out. So I don't know that I have the answer to your question directly, but bringing more resources to the investigation side that will hopefully prevent bad actors from becoming worse actors, polluting more of our groundwater, our land, and our air, is exactly what this task force will be designed to do.
So if people see something, how do they alert the task force?
So EPA has a tip line. The database that they would enter it in is called ECHO, but if they just Googled EPA environmental complaint, it should come up right away. That's then funneled to our headquarters and goes to the appropriate office nationwide. And then that would be something ultimately, even if we're deciding that EPA is more in the lead, we are typically coordinating with New Mexico ED to make sure that they're not already on it, one, and two, they usually have a better understanding of the regulatory history there and what's happened in the past, which always funnels into our case moving forward.
And similar, New Mexico Environment Department has a tip line. You can submit it either by phone or by web in English or Spanish.
All right. Well, thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura, for that interview. You can watch her entire discussion online on the Our Land YouTube page. Now let's bring back our Line Opinion panelists back to the virtual roundtable. The state of New Mexico is rescinding its work from home policy, calling for more than 8,000 of its employees to return to work in early January. That's as we approach the holiday season. And the CDC warns of a possible triple-demic, with the threat of flu, RSV, and COVID all growing. State employees were notified about this policy change at the start of December. Now, Tom, is it a reasonable request to have a full return to the office for all 22,000 employees after, and I'll remind you, after we have just gotten through the holiday break, everyone's traveling, everyone's ganged up together, suddenly you got 22,000 people all indoors. Is this a smart idea?
Well, that'll be up to the governor and the different cabinet secretaries. The number that hit me was the 8,000, that are still in that realm of, doing that remote work, as opposed to 22,000 total state employees. And so that was, that number is like, okay, it's not a majority, but it's definitely a group that, really needs to be addressed, because I think the state of New Mexico is running up against the same kind of issue that many small businesses and even large businesses are facing, as far as the changing workplace and the changing, work environment. Whether it's not just reserved for frontline workers in restaurants, but also in call centers and corporations and manufacturers. Everybody's trying to grapple with what this new work dynamic is. Even with my own company, we have mainly remote workers, and then we'll come in from time to time, meet at the office to hash through some different things. But for the state of New Mexico, with $18 million worth of leased space, most of it is in Santa Fe. That comes into the management aspect. And so, is the state being a good steward of the resources that it manages? And I think bringing the employees back, I think is something that should be, strongly considered. If that's the work model of showing that you're an efficient use, that you're using state resources efficiently, then they need to be able to bring them back or find a way to.
I want to make sure I'm clear on what you're saying, Tom. I mean, you're talking about, satisfying a need to pay for something that's already been paid for versus folks' health. Why should the $18 million worth of state buildings not being used even be in the conversation about health?
Because it was actually, I was framing it more as just a workplace issue as opposed to a health issue.
Right.
From the health issue, you would have to assume that, there was, that the environments can handle, have been upgraded since COVID, and are safe to come back. That was the base. That was the bottom line assumption. Because I don't think anybody would want any workers anywhere, regardless if they're government or private sector, going into an environment that's not safe. That was never if that was the way it came across, definitely not the case. I'm just saying that there's a new workforce dynamic out there that was created as a result of the COVID pandemic. And, clearly we're not necessarily through that. We were through an aspect of it, but now there's been a resurgence. So, a lot is up in the air, but I'm just saying that when you look at the resources the state has, it's quite a conundrum for the state of New Mexico, but they're not alone. There are private businesses that are in that same position as well.
Exactly. Inez, should the state have spoken with union leaders before announcing this policy change? Should they meet now? It just seems like it caught the union completely off guard, even though this was announced, just a little bit ago. It just seems like an awfully short turnaround. I'm curious your sense of that.
I think that consultation is always a better idea than surprising people. And when you think about returning to work, obviously for the state, the focus has to be on serving taxpayers and spending their money wisely. And it's very difficult to look and figure out the exact best way to do it in every instance. It's much easier to say, let's all go back to work. But going through each type of job and getting supervisors to say this is what would work with some people in, some people out is hard. So sometimes I think people get tired. And
is that a good enough reason not to do it just because it's hard?
No, I think there should be consultation. And when you think about it, learning in December that you're going back to work January 1st, think about if you're working at home and your kids come home after school. You have to get childcare all of a sudden. If you're taking care of an elderly person while you work, there's just so many work-life things that have to be worked out that I'm hoping that the state will enter into some sort of consultation and perhaps delay it. And at the same time, start setting their building needs so they can reduce their profile.
Right.
You don't need as many offices if you're going to have office shares and maybe 3 days at work, 2 days at home. I mean, there's a lot of ways to do this that will serve the public, serve the workers, and deliver the results that people need. And I would, first of all, if I was a worker, I would say, what is your ventilation situation, and is the air being changed frequently?
Thank you. Yep.
That would be my first question. And if it's not, I don't think anybody should have to risk their health to be at work. And one other thing, if I'm a rural representative, and let's say I'm conservative and I think everyone should be back at work, one thing I would think about, the more remote work that you can do, the more jobs there's going to be in places like Tucumcari or Jal or far off states. Not everyone has to live in Santa Fe and Albuquerque. So look at this as an opportunity to expand jobs with the state all over and really revitalize rural economies.
That's an interesting point. No, would not have thought of that. I want to remind folks, as you're watching this on Friday night, we are taping this just a couple hours before the Department of Health has a big press conference at 1 o'clock today, as we're doing this on Thursday. And I'm curious, Algernon, what they're going to come up with. I don't think we're going back to a mask mandate. That's not coming, certainly. But I got to wonder if possibly phasing in the return might be the better way to go here. Instead of doing this drop dead, everybody walks in the door at a certain day, at a certain time. I got to imagine those conversations have to be happening. What's your sense of that?
There's conversations also just about messaging. I mean, it's far from mask mandates. It's hard to hear the health department really promote the wisdom of mask use. And if we're going to start phasing people saying, okay, we got to come back to work. Well, okay, not just ventilation, but can you adjust the space so that you can space people apart? Will we normalize masks? And there's really a sort of a cultural and ethical choice that is being made, and I hope we can make it consciously. Are we going to emphasize productivity? Which is important, especially in government work, because customer service is extremely important and wise use of public funds, sure. Right. But are we also going to address the ethos of public health and how to live and work healthily? And if we feel that we cannot accommodate remote work, first of all, we have to take into account what that means for people in terms of, do I have someone vulnerable at my home? Do I have obligations over the last 2 years that I now have to make other arrangements for? What is the expense involved in restoring my commute? All of that, plus, do I feel safe and healthy in my workplace? And do I feel like if I wear a mask, I'm going to have to constantly do apologetics and explain this? Or will it just be accepted as, yes, we wear masks to curb the spread of these viruses that are in our news headlines?
Interesting point there. Tom, the unions are saying we could have job loss from this. Like, some folks might just quit because there's other opportunities out there to work at home. There's plenty of private employers who are not going to force you to come into a compromised situation. We're already understaffed in state government as it is. Is this a danger, a legitimate problem here?
Oh, it's one of the many unintended consequences that need to be weighed as the state looks at what its next steps are with regards to remote work policy. Right. But I also think that there's another number here that really jumped out at me, which really just shows how thin that available workforce is, or qualified available workforce, and that 61% of new hires lasted their first year during the 2022 budget year.
Wow. I
mean, to have that kind of attrition is just, I don't know how many jobs that 61% represents, but that's an HR department that is just churning through a lot of applications and a lot of people. So, wow. I think that there are larger issues that could potentially be at play, but yes, that law of unintended consequences, what's going to happen if we phase it in or do it all, cold turkey? I think Inez brings up a great point about, maybe economic development, having that be an economic development initiative. But then that relies on the backbone of technology, and how well can we rely on that, to help make that happen.
Interesting you mentioned that the technology. Inez, our wastewater surveillance program halted at the end of September, supposed to resume in December, but it was during a critical period when we're trying to assess how bad the situation is. And I'll remind folks, we had every county red but one this week in New Mexico. So we need information, don't we?
We need information, and we also need acceptance. I think there was a political decision among everybody, Democrats, Republicans, that we were just going to pretend COVID was done and go about our lives. And we're living with the results of that. And it's not done. And I read recently that there's a new variant perhaps developing that are the monoclonal antibodies that they treat COVID with probably won't work on. Wow. So we may end up with a variant that we can't treat the way we can. And the reality is, despite what Dr. Schmida's tweets, masks do work, social distancing works, ventilation works. And, I was thinking about if you're commuting and you're riding in the commuter buses, sitting in a commuter bus 2 hours a day with people.
Yep.
All of those things are places where you can get very, very sick. Mm-hmm. And one more point about working at home, if you can figure out a schedule where people can spend a couple of days, some days in the office, do both, just think of how many cars you're going to get off the road and how much that's going to reduce gases that cause climate change.
Fair point.
So there's a lot of, I think, reasons to make the transition to our new way of working. It's just complicated and it's hard, but I really believe if we think about it, we can do it and serve the people of New Mexico and spend their dollars wisely.
Excellent points there. Just a reminder to folks, we've got a junior high school in Portales closed this week because RSV is raging through students and staff is sick. There's not enough staff to open the school. So there you go. Thanks again to our line panelists. We'll be back for a final discussion on bus fares and access to public transit after action from the Albuquerque City Council. That's in about 10 minutes. But first, we're zeroing in on a new poll that shows widespread support for modernizing the state legislature. That could include changes like lengthening sessions, expanding legislative staff, here, and paying lawmakers. In a recent Facebook Live interview, I spoke with Mario Jimenez, the executive director of Common Cause New Mexico, about what the poll found and asked if we could see any of those changes as early as 2023. In broad strokes, who did you hire for the poll? What was the intent? What did you want to find out at Common Cause?
Yeah, so in collaboration with a few local groups, as well as some independent individuals, and with funding from the Thornburg Foundation, we were able to commission a poll through Research and Polling, who's a well-known polling firm here out of New Mexico. And really the goal was to see where New Mexicans feel about modernizing or professionalizing our legislature. What we can do to help improve the process. And as you mentioned, there's three key goals really circulating around it. Those being, actually paying our legislators who are currently unpaid, receive a stipend, and of course, hiring them full-time paid staff, which they currently do not have, and a lot of New Mexicans are unaware of. Mm-hmm. And lastly, extending the length of the sessions, which a lot of people are still unsure of, that we have 30 and 60-day sessions. So to cram in all of the various pieces of legislation to try to help improve our laws in the state. So those are really the three main components that are circulating around this poll.
Let's talk about session. What was the first one you did? Session length. What were the results there? Because again, I think if you've not lived other places, and this is not a put down for folks certainly who live here, but understanding what a full-time session looks like and feels like versus how we do it now is an awfully big leap. What did you guys find when it came to session length?
Yeah, so this was actually one of the largest numbers that we saw. I mean, we saw the vast majority across party lines. I want to say it was around 70% of those who were surveyed do feel like we need to have lengthened sessions. Now, we often see in the final weeks of either the 30 and or the 60-day session where bills are just being crammed into committees and passed in the middle of the night when the most of the public are not having a watchful eye on what's going on. By extending our sessions, not only do we provide more time for the public to be involved in the legislative session, but also another important component is giving our legislators and their administrative staff time to properly research the legislation that is before them, so they're not making decisions late at night when they're already tired. I think we do need to provide them with a little bit more time as well as resources to make the good decisions on behalf of the people of New Mexico, and make sure they have all the information needed and the components needed to move forward with that legislation, to actually make sure it can be appropriately implemented, not just passed.
Go ahead and tell the folks what you guys found about how people think legislators are being paid now versus the reality of how they're being paid now.
Yeah, absolutely. But first, what I'd like to actually bring up is, what we see a lot in mainstream media. Mainstream media, we hear a lot of talk about DC. We hear a lot of talk about, the slow down, the bog down, nothing's happening. They get paid, buku bucks to come and go. They get to fly back and forth, unlimited use of the US mail. And immediately, there's association with our local legislators. And that's just not true. So there's a disconnect there from an understanding of how legislation and our legislators operate in the DC spectrum versus our local legislators. So in doing so, we posed a question to likely voters who were surveyed. How much do you think that our legislators are compensated? And I'll just jump to one of the biggest numbers that really blew me away was only 2% of those were surveyed knew that our legislator is unpaid. Only 2%. Wow. So if you can imagine, that's an awful lot of people who have a misconception that, we have individuals that are going to Santa Fe and think they're making big bucks. Right. And that's just not the case. And I think, again, that goes back to where we need to, properly educate our citizens of what exactly our legislators do and how they're compensated. And, within those numbers, we found that there was 64% of likely voters, again, this is across the board, Democrats, Republicans, as well as individuals who are unaffiliated, who now support the concept of paying our legislators. So I think that is, again, very good numbers. It shows, that there are individuals within New Mexico, a vast majority of individuals in New Mexico, who would like to see our legislators paid, compensated for the work that they are doing on behalf of the people.
As an ex-congressional staffer, I'm very sensitive to this, and staffer in other places too. What do we gain from having more staff for folks out there? Because again, we're talking about value for the money. If this is going to go out there to the public, someone's going to have to make a value case, basically saying, if we pay this amount of money, here's what you can expect. That's wildly better than what we're having now, and not just a little bit, but way better. What do we gain with more staff? You touched on it. Lobbyists are de facto staff right now, but again, that pitch to the public, how does that get put out there?
In addition to limiting the power in your lobbyists, I think one of the biggest benefits that you're going to see, and I think this is something that you can appreciate from your past life as well, is constituent services. Yes. I mean, right now our legislature is out of session. So the vast majority, with the exception of those in leadership, do not have an individual to assist them with constituent services. What people do not understand is our legislatures themselves are receiving hundreds of correspondence daily through email, through text message, through social media. And that one person is operating as their own office. That one legislature is responsible for getting back to each and every single one of those correspondence. So a lot of times you will have a constituent who has a very important issue that gets lost and buried in hundreds of emails, hundreds of text messages, hundreds of voicemails. I mean, quite often I hear in talking to the public, well, there's no point in me calling my legislator, their voicemail is full, without an understanding that they may have a full-time job in addition to having their family at home, in addition to having to respond to each and every single correspondence themselves. So by providing them with a staff member who can assist them with those constituent services, attending meetings that they may not be able to attend because there's so many different ones that may be scheduled around the same time. Right. A lot of these districts are quite large. So it would be very difficult for someone to travel from the northern part of their district to the southern part of the district to make another community meeting. It's a very difficult task for our legislatures to perform on their own.
Likely voters between 18 and 34 polled strongest in favor of paying legislators, with 78% voting in favor, which is an unbelievable number. Why do you think the support for pay is so strong with newer voters, Gen Z and millennials, compared to older voters? Between 35 and 64, it came in at 64%. In seniors, only 56%. That is the future speaking loudly here?
I think they absolutely are. And, this is a trend that we have been seeing over the last couple of years, right? I mean, if you look at voter turnout, even, we're seeing typically, you used to be able to look at our older generations as being the vast majority of individuals who turn out and vote.
Right.
And with a lot of key issues surrounding college, surrounding healthcare, surrounding retirement, the longevity of Social Security, we're seeing a lot of younger generations turning out to vote, being vocal, and participating in the overall democracy of our country. And, I think this poll shows that our younger generations are becoming more engaged and have a clear understanding of what is happening within our legislature and within politics, and would like to see some change that's going to help improve them and other generations beyond.
That's going to be heard, I think. That's where I think this poll is going to have a lot of legs. It really has just uncorked a lot of interesting things. I'm wondering, Mario, if there's another poll yet to be put out there. I mean, there's always the initial poll that gets people to open their eyes. I'm wondering if another one from Common Cause down the road to talk about these things like length of session, like what would you prefer? Those kind of open-end questions. Is that something in the planning stages?
Well, that's actually a great question. And we do have a second phase coming on. What we're looking at doing is putting on a few focus groups. That way we can have some more in-depth conversations with New Mexicans about these various topics. Rather than just ask them a few questions, give them some actual background and hear some feedback from them on what do they feel would be the best avenue. As you mentioned, should we go to a 60-day? Should we go to a full year? What is it that you feel would be best to address these various shortfalls that we currently have in our legislative sessions?
Welcome back to our Line Opinion panelists as we get set for one final discussion. Albuquerque City Councilors are considering a proposal to modify the bus system's zero fare program, making it a crime to try to ride without paying or showing a pass or an ID. The only way for riders to ride for free would be to present that photo ID. Now, I'm going to start with Tom here. This zero fare program has been in effect for less than 1 year. Is this push by city councilors to change the program premature? What's prompted all of this? Because everyone seemed gung-ho for this not that long ago.
Yeah, I think it's lack of really usable information is, at least people using reliable information. I think that I like the idea. I like I think the zero fare program is a good program. It really provides a great need and exposes more people to, the concept of public transportation out in the West. I think the reason it's been coming under scrutiny is because, some people have really made a huge issue or a very limited items as far as crime is concerned. And just because there are a few isolated incidents, all of a sudden it becomes a public safety issue. Right. And so I think that that is truly the driver of this particular issue at this point in time.
Inez, we've heard from opponents of a similar issue, providing some form of ID to vote. We all know about this. The idea there is such measures would place a barrier in front of minorities and lower class residents. Now, in this case, adding that ID requirement to ride would also impact undocumented citizens who need public transportation. Does this proposal kind of, fold in all those different elements of our society with this idea of this goal of zero fare?
I think that if you're going to make the bus ride free, it's free. And you don't put up a barrier against people who might not have the government issued idea that you're supposed to have. And especially one of the goals of the zero fare nationwide movement is that poor people who don't have cars still have to spend more of their income on transportation because they have to pay bus fares and all the different things they use it for. And if you want them to put money in their pocket to buy food or pay their rent, they don't have to pay transportation. So making it harder is just, honestly, it's stupid. And that Albuquerque is turning into a place that wants to criminalize being poor is not a good look. Even if you say, let's have a bus, you have to have a pass. Even if you did that, to then make it a misdemeanor to not present the pass is just adding one more layer of ridiculousness. The jails there are overcrowded, the courts are full, the cops are busy doing other things. And I will bet you, I don't know what, but you can imagine a homeless person getting shot on the bus if this goes in like this. And I just either charge them because you think people should pay to ride the bus. That's a legitimate policy decision, or say we're going to go free and we're going to make it free. And if some middle class person doesn't want to sit next to a homeless person, they can get up and sit down the other end.
I love you for that. Thank you. Absolutely. Algernon, I got to ask you, in your part of the world, you're down in Deming, of course, the South Central Regional Transit Authority in Doña Ana County outside of Las Cruces, as you know, eliminated fares from April to Labor Day this year. And as a result, they noted a 15% ridership increase. Isn't that the goal of these programs? I mean, it's interesting. Did that settle the issue for you?
Well, yeah. So we have this indefinite trial period to see how this works, and part of it is to see how much the demand increases and what the expense will be. This involves not only regular ridership, but the city's Dial-A-Ride service, which is a home-to-destination service that is provided for people who are, say, homebound, wheelchair-bound. They have, they need that service. That's a much more expensive service, but it's a federal requirement that if the regular riders ride for free, the Dial-A-Ride folks also have to ride for free. And so I'm nervous. I'm watching what happens in Las Cruces because I know from over the past year or so, the unhoused populations have become kind of a target of the political sphere, and they've been presented as a public safety threat. And any space where people might encounter the unhoused gets stigmatized as being less safe. And so I'm hoping that doesn't jeopardize the trial of this zero fare, because ridership will go up, and that's exactly what we need. We need to cut down on the emissions. We need to also just cut down on how expensive it is to be poor.
Tom, I want to circle back to something you mentioned. We got to color a little bit more, and that is the issue of crime on the buses. In the reporting, for folks at home, the council in 2021 asked for a report on this very issue of security incidents. So in the first half of the year, there were 135 transit-related incidents, according to the data shared with the council. But left out of the council's discussion is there was 1,900,000 boardings or individual rides throughout the system. That means those incidents accounted for less than 1% of all rides. But this is all we hear about is crime on the bus. What am I missing here? Some kind of disconnection here.
Yeah, it is a huge disconnect. And Source New Mexico blog was the one who actually compiled a lot of that data. So a great shout out to them. With respect to media in general, because the media is what is shaping these particular issues. At times, there's just not an opportunity to really dig into this level of detail, especially on the television side. Newspaper side, yes. But in a world of sound bites and 30-second stories, 15-second newsers, broadcast does not provide the opportunity to go deep on different issues. So as a result, sometimes the people who are being interviewed have the opportunity to shape an argument to suit their particular position.
Well, they've won this one, because I'm telling you right now, of those 135 incidents, Inez, only 32 occurred on the bus. 32 out of 1,000,009 rides. Where's the sense of all this? How can we make rational decisions if we're not going to be rational about crime here?
I think that the reality is that crime in America peaked in the late 90s, as we all know. And even though it has risen in recent years, it is not as bad as it was then, for the most part, except with I think a few instances depending on the area of the city or state. But we're afraid. I mean, when you have television stations that lead with crime all the time, and when you have personal experiences, I mean, people have a right to be nervous because, their car gets stolen out of the driveway, things happen to them, it happens to their friends. It makes sense that they're uncomfortable, but anecdotal evidence isn't the same as reality. Right. And we're living in an anecdotal world where what happened to our friend becomes the reality for everybody. And and if you ride on the bus and you see someone, shoplifting in the corner, not shoplifting, but stealing someone's purse, all of a sudden you think it's not safe for everyone. So I think we have to step back and actually, what Albuquerque should do, I hope, is look at those instances, see who's actually doing them, and really say, sounds like the buses are one of the more safe places in the city, honestly, when you look at that less than 1%.
There's being called, Algernon, a hyperbolic narrative of crime, quote unquote, that's kind of ruling the day here. But we must add, most riders in Albuquerque are African American or Latino. So it's easy to do this, isn't it, when it's just minority people and talking about crime? Just something seems very obvious here, unless I'm missing something.
Yes, and it's been weaponized. We just got through a political cycle where that so-called hyperbolic narrative about crime was prevalent throughout that campaign and made a difference in some of the campaigns. Down here in I live in a city in Deming where I recently took over our newspaper, and people have been really anxious about the fact that we don't have blotter style crime reporting anymore, which emphasizes the arrests rather than the whole process and exonerations and plea agreements and things like that. And that's because there's just the sense that there must be this terrible danger in my community. And so I think that using these things in our politics this way really is actually bad for public safety, because people withdraw from public spaces where these shared things like libraries and buses, these really sort of safe, anodyne municipal spaces that we share together, become viewed as dangerous because we might be exposed to somebody who's different. We might see a homeless person. We might see somebody who has a different, has a different skin color, has a different ethnic background than me, and that makes me uncomfortable. And we equate that somehow with being less safe.
Yeah. Exactly right. And a reminder to the folks at home, that decision looms as councils recently voted to remove all references to safe outdoor spaces within the city's zoning code. All kinds of things going on when it comes to homeless, people of color. We're trying. All right. Thanks again to our line panel as always this week. Be sure to let us know what you think about any of the topics our line covered on our Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram pages. And catch any episode you may have missed on the PBS video app on your Roku or smart TV. Any other close watchers of the Albuquerque City Council had enough whiplash yet? The go, no-go nature of the council is frankly getting old. Full-throated support for votes and progress seemingly never stand the test of voter reaction. A great idea in June is toast by August. There has likely never been a city council in modern Albuquerque history who has botched, fumbled, pooched, or any other way you want to describe it, so many issues in 1 year. At this point, one can imagine voters turning off to the process. How can policies go from voting in enthusiastic affirmative votes to permanently banned by statute in less than 6 months? Governance is currently backwards at council. Take a tough vote, then ask your constituents afterwards, instead of the other way around. Bus fares, homeless encampments, stadiums, downtown, you name it, all eventually drowned out by the sound of gears grinding into reverse. One of my best bosses ever used to say, politicians do one of two and two things only, nothing and overreact. That is City Council right now. The overreaction to citizen complaints to tough votes has got to stop, because we're at a point in council where any vote is now suspect. If it's a process problem, they need to fix it. If the problem is spineless council members who blow with the wind, voters have a way of fixing that problem as well. Thanks again for joining us and for staying informed and engaged. We'll see you again next week in Focus.